Hey everyone, welcome back to week 2 of our embroidery stitch along. Last week we did our that's what we're doing this week. Spoilers. Last week we did our satin stitch as well as a whipped back stitch on our mushrooms here. This week we're going to continue by stitching these leaves and the stems on either side of the mushrooms. So, like I already mentioned, we're going to be doing what's called a stem stitch. And stem stitch is basically named kind of for what a lot of people use it for, or that's how I think about it anyway. But we're going to use stem stitch on the stems of these branches here. And then on the leaves, those little black leaves, we're going to attempt a fishbone stitch. Or if, again, because this is an embroidery stitch along, feel free to do whatever stitch that you're most comfortable with or that is speaking to you the most. You could easily do a long short stitch for the leaves or a satin stitch if you really enjoyed that from last week. You can continue with satin stitch on the leaves. And you can also continue with the back stitch or whipped back stitch on the branches. But we're going to do a stem stitch. And I have my sampler here. If this is one of your first projects, I definitely recommend doing kind of like a practice hoop. It's a really fun way to kind of experiment with the different thicknesses of the thread, get a feel for what it'll look like, and kind of experiment off of your pattern before you put it on the fabric. So just a little FYI about that. So again, just like last week, I have 2, 4, and 6 for the number of strands that I'm using to demonstrate here. So I'm going to start right here. This is my line for 2 strands. This will be my line for 4, my line for 6. So I already have my needle threaded and knotted. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up through the fabric. And just like back stitch, you do want to keep your stitches uniform or like the same distance. So I already came up and now I'm just going to go back down, very similar to how we started our back stitch last week. And this time I'm going to keep my loop out though. So I'm not going to pull it all the way through the fabric. I'm going to keep this loop here. I'm just going to go ahead and hold that with my thumb to keep it out of the way of you guys. And then to start my stem stitch, I'm going to kind of eyeball the middle between where I came up and where I went back down and pull my needle. And now I can get rid of that loop. So the idea is it's kind of like pushing this stitch a little bit. I don't know if you can really see that, but it's kind of going to push it. And what it's going to do is kind of give it like a twisted rope look, which is really a pretty effect or texture to have for stems. So again, trying to keep my stitches uniform from this point where I just came up in the fabric between point A and point B. So we have A, B, and we'll call that C there in the middle. So point C, making a new point, kind of trying to keep it the same distance. Going back down. Again, I'm not going to pull it all the way through. I'm going to keep a loop. It's up to you how big your loop is. Not big enough to be tangled and not small enough that it's going to get in your way. And then instead of coming up in the middle, I'm going to come back up to the same hole that my first stitch went down to. So this is the hole that I originally went down. I'm going to come back up through that same hole. And then pull tight. And that is how you start doing a stem stitch. And as you keep going, again, keeping your stitches uniform, coming back up. Oh, was that right? No, it was not right. But one moment. I got ahead of myself. It happens. So, again, keeping your stitches uniform, you're going to come back up through the fabric the same. Let's see if I can. Trying to keep things in focus here. It's easier said than done. I still am without a. Just actually going to do. It's just me here, so I'm going to look at that thread before I try to put it back on my needle. There we go. Got it. So again, keeping my stitches uniform, I'll go back down. And when I come back up, I again am going to come back up through the same hole that I went down into. And you can kind of see how it's weaving right there. I kind of already see like the rope look or the twist look, I guess. With stem stitch, you do want to be cognizant of what direction you're looping. So if all my loops are going down like this, I need to make sure that every loop is. You don't really want to be switching back and forth. So all my loops are just going this way, so that way your twist keeps going in the same direction. I could have totally done my loops going up this way, and that would have been fine, but I just want to make sure that I maintain the same direction of the twist all the way through. Again, I think the most important takeaways are coming up back through that same hole. You don't want to come back up in like the middle of the stitch, not the same hole. So let's say I were to come back up towards the middle here or something like that, then there would be a gap between my stitches, and you don't want that. So again, coming back up through the same hole I went down into for my last stitch to keep that twist. I'm going to go all the way down this line doing it so I can show you how I end it. I'm trying my best to kind of stitch slow enough so that way you guys can see the process, but fast enough that these videos don't take forever in a day. Feel free to skip ahead. That's totally fine. Won't hurt my feelings. And again, when it comes to like the uniformity of your stitches, you definitely don't need to like measure it or anything like that. Just eyeball it, do your best. That's fine. All right, so now I'm almost to the end of my line, keeping the stem stitch going. Okay, now that I'm to the end of my line, I could totally just pull this through and just go down and end it there, but I like to give it a little twist at the end still, or keep that twist going all the way to the end. So I'm going to come back up through the middle again, and then I'm going to go back down and just about the same hole of that other stitch to end it. So that way I still have a nice twist at the end instead of just like a back stitch or a normal stitch, I guess, a normal stitch there. And I think you can kind of see how twisted that looks, and it's kind of like a rope twist. And again, to finish it off, I'm just going to knot it like this, and then I'll take my scissors and I'll clip off the remaining thread. Okay, now I'm going to grab my 4 strands, and I won't finish this line all the way across. I just want you guys to be able to see the difference between 2 strands and 4 strands. And I think you can kind of already tell. I mean, they're pretty similar, you know, to like our back stitch from last week, but just so you guys can see. And again, I already have it knotted. So I'm gonna go up through my fabric, kind of decide what length I want my stitches to be, and then start my stem. So again, remember when we start our stem stitch, for the first stitch, and the first stitch only, we're gonna come up in the middle of point A and point B. Because if I came back up in the same hole I went down, then my stitch, I think, would just come undone. If I'm thinking that right in my head. Then I'm going to come back up through the same hole that I went down in, and continue this all the way across the line. And again, just like with backstitch, I think that if you're doing an organic shape or a shape with lots of curves, the smaller you keep your stitches, the easier it is to follow along with the path of the line. But if it's like a straight line like this or a geometric shape, then longer stitches work just as well. It just depends on like how tight you want your your twist to look, I guess. The shorter the stitches, the tighter the twist, I think, in my opinion. The longer the stitch, the looser the twist, if that makes sense. I'm just continuing this. And with the 4 strands, I think you could probably see the twist that I'm talking about a little easier. For the actual pattern itself, I think I'm going to use 2 strands, maybe 3, but I'm thinking 2, because what the stitch I'm going to use in the leaf, I know I'm going to use 2 strands, so I'm just trying to think in my head if I want it kind of to be like cohesive in the pattern, or would it bother me if like the stems were done with 3 as opposed to 2, if that makes sense. Okay. So again, ending it, what I'm going to do is come back up, just like I've been doing through the same hole that my last stitch went down in, pulling it through, and then to end it, I'm going to go back down through the same hole, so that way I get a nice little twist at the end instead of just a normal stitch. So you can kind of see that corded look. Boom. Okay, then the last one, excuse me, last one, where is my 6 strand? There's my 6 strand. That's like a kitchen sponge that I just use to like put my needles into or stick it like a pin cushion. I thought it was nifty. Okay, so 6 strands. So I'm going to follow this line for my 6 strands. Coming up. Oh, took some of the black with me. Just come through on the back. I'll do that. Okay. Then, I realize now I've done both those with the loop going this way. So just to show you, I'm going to try to do my loop going this way. So that way you guys can see that it truly doesn't matter as long as you keep it the same for all of your stitches. And you guys can kind of see what the other direction it looks like. So again, coming back up, the same hole I went down in. And you can see like I like to kind of catch my thread with my thumb to kind of help me keep that loop and not have to worry of like timing it to catch it. So I just like kind of hook my thumb and push it up and then kind of pinch it there. If that makes sense. And then I just take away my thumb when I'm ready to pull it tight. I feel like stitching is probably similar to some of the benefits that like people get from playing musical instruments when it comes to like finger dexterity. And I feel like maybe even when it comes to like center line activities and things like that, I wonder if stitching is beneficial to stuff like that. There we go. I'm gonna keep it on the camera. And we'll just finish this right here. Oh, I got a bit of black. You can see the back of my hoop is not pretty, but I'm not gonna let that bother me because this is just a sample. Boom. Back down so I can end. Oh, there, and with like a little twist. I feel like that came out a little wonky, but again, it's practice hoop, it doesn't matter. Okay, so now you guys can kind of see the different twists. So this twist was like the loop going up. This twist was the loop kind of going down. If I show you like that, like as if they were flowers. Kind of see if I can get it to focus a little better for you. There you go. So yeah, so you can kind of see how the loop, this is kind of like the twists are going this way And this one, you're leaning this way. Same with this one. Oh, I think my meal is here. Okay, perfect. And I am just gonna cut this so that way I can show you the next stitch. So I'm gonna switch back to my needle that had my 2 strands. No, I'm gonna switch back to the needle that had 4 strands, just so I can demonstrate what the next stitch is on this bigger shape. So the tricky part with this, get back in focus, is that on the pattern, the leaves are quite small. So again, I'm going to definitely use 2 strands for that. But I've drawn a larger version here, so that way we can kind of practice, and I definitely kind of recommend you doing that as well. So this is kind of like our leaf shape. I thought I brought a pin over here. Did I not bring a pin over here? Maybe I didn't. That's fine. So, no, it's not. I need a pin. Give me one moment and I'll go grab. All right, I have a pin. So, this is that leaf shape. It's very similar to what is on the pattern. So what we're going to do to fill in the leaves is called a fishbone stitch. And it's fishbone, I think, is kind of what that pattern, the crisscross pattern, is called a lot when it comes to design elements. So that's what we're going to be using for this as well. So what's going to happen is that as we stitch, we're going to do a little kind of crisscross action. It'll kind of cause this nice crisscross V pattern on the leaves. It's one of my favorite to use on leaves. I see it a lot on leaves. I think it just nicely mimics like the texture of a leaf and the way like the veins usually form. So to help us kind of keep our stitches organized, what I like to do is draw a line down the middle of my leaf before I use the stitch bone. The fishbone stitch, and then I'm also going to draw lines like this. And what that's going to do is help me know where to bring my needle down as I stitch. So I have 3 lines, 1 in the middle and then 2 on either side. So let me grab my needle again. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to outline the shape first. I'm just going to bring my needle up at the point of my leaf, at the top, like this. And then I'm going to bring it down, but I'm not going to bring it down all the way down here. And that's because it does affect the pattern of the fishbone, how long this first stitch is in the middle. So you kind of want to keep it more towards the top of your leaf, so that way it allows the just said fish sticks. That was exciting. Fishbone stitch to appear sooner. If you make this too long, then the fishbone stitch will only appear kind of down here. If that makes sense. I hope it does. So I'm going to keep mine up here. Again, this is kind of one of the benefits to having a practice hoops. That way, if you wanted to experiment with this, you could always do 2 of these shapes and have one of your first stitch go down a little farther and like one a little higher, so that way you could compare the 2. But I'm just going to do 1 here. So again, what I'm going to do is just on that line in the middle, I'm going to kind of keep it towards the top. My first stitch is just going to go down like this and pull it tight. Something wonky happened. Okay, so now I just have my first stitch. And what I like to do is 3 stitches at the top that go through that same hole. And I think that just kind of helps the spacing of the stitches up here. So I'm going to put one kind to the side and bring it down. And again, kind of to this side as well. Bring it down. That same hole. I think I could have made those a little wider, but I think that's fine. And then, now the fun part. Following the outline as best I can, I'm using heat erasable markers, and if you're using like a water pen or a heat pen, then you don't have to worry about following that line too closely, because whenever you take your heat or water to it, it'll erase. So I'm not going to like worry about covering up my markings. If you've traced with like pencil, or like in my case on my pattern, like this is printer ink, then I'm definitely gonna have to be more aware of covering that up. But for this, I'm not gonna be too bothered by it. So now what I'm going to do is this stitch is going to go down on, this stitch is going to go down on this line over here. So it's going to cross that center line and come down on the other side. What I want to do is make sure that I have the right angle. Sorry, I'm having a hard time keeping this on camera for some reason. Of the angle. I don't want to like make it too long of an angle or too short so it covers up my stitches. Just kind of want to find the sweet spot. So I think this will be good. Right through like that. Then on the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm going to try to keep these stitches, the stitch that I just did and the stitch that's coming up, kind of parallel. So, parallel-ish on the same, like straight. Does that make sense? So like this one came in that hole and this one's coming up at a very similar point. They're symmetrical maybe. It might be the word I'm trying to use. And the same thing, I'm going to try to use that same angle for this stitch as well. So I'm going to put that down on crossing the center line and going back down on the other side. And I want to try to keep my bottom kind of straight as well. So top and bottom, like that. Okay, well, hopefully they'll stop barking soon. And now I'm just going to come back up on the same side, on the other side, cross center line and come down. And just like satin stitch, you want to keep your stitches parallel to each other. So see how this stitch I'm doing is going to lie parallel with this stitch, making a small kind of X over the other one. Same with the other side. And then just like satin stitch, you do want to try to make your stitches close together. Unlike satin stitch, you can't go back and like fill in the stitches that you've missed. So do your best to make sure that you don't have gaps between your stitches. So let's see if I can get the lighting on that. So there's not really a gap or a noticeable gap between those two. Let's see if I can focus that again. There we go. I feel like that's dark. Okay. All right. And this way. Oops. So again, keeping a similar angle and keeping my stitches parallel and the stitch on either side straight so the bottom and top kind of match. And again, if it's not super precise, I don't think it's going to matter that much. It's a leaf, it's an organic shape. They're meant to be wonky. Well, to a certain extent, you know what I mean? Just poked myself. There we go. And you can kind of already see that fishbone pattern starting. I think it's called like a fishbone because it kind of like imitates, I assume fish's bones, but kind of like the pattern of like a scale or something like that too. I think I've also heard of this like pattern of like crisscross. When I think of it, I always call it like either like a fishbone pattern or like it starts with an H, like an herringbone pattern or something like that maybe. When I look it up on Pinterest and things like that for other design elements. And you can kind of see how having these lines are very helpful for when it comes to like deciding where your stitch is going to come down at. Some people do take their stitch all the way over to the side of their pattern. But when you do that, you're going to use more floss for one. kind of unnecessarily. So that's kind of why I like using this method. Instead, kind of conserve as much floss as possible. But you can do whatever your preference is and your comfort level, and that's fine. And if you have a different method of doing this, then of course share away, because I am by no means an expert. I am just an enthusiast. Obviously the leaves on the pattern itself, because especially if you kept it the same size as the PDF file, is going to go much quicker compared to this one. There we go. Feel like my ankles cut me a little bit off, but that's all right. I have my little Stitch buddy up here. I have 3 dogs. You heard 2 of them downstairs barking at the mail. Those are my big dogs. And then I have what we call our little dog. He's not like terribly little. He's just a little smaller compared to the other dogs and the rest of like my family's dogs, because my 2 big dogs are the smallest of the big dogs compared to my sister and my parents. And then we have this little dog who, compared to like my parents' dog, for example, who's like 80 to 90 pounds, he's definitely like a little guy. He's like, I don't know, like 40 pounds maybe, but he's right here. I don't know if you can see him. Oops, there he is. And that is how he is most days when I'm stitching. Just always slightly to the left of me. We have only had him this year, but it's really funny when I think about like the way that my body or like my subconscious has adjusted to him is really different, because he is such a Velcro dog. I have to always like be aware of where he is, because when we first got him, I was just tripping and like running into him all the time. Like my shins just constantly had bruises, because when I would turn, he would literally be right there. And now when I like enter or exit like an area, I just have learned to like subconsciously take my turns a bit wider. I always like, when I first turn and take a step, my first initial step is like a little bigger and like higher than I would normally take a step, because I'm so used to like stepping over him or stepping around him. That has kind of just become second nature to do that. So I just think it's really funny, and I must look really goofy when he's not around and like I'm just constantly doing these things. That's a big dog. But the nice thing about my Velcro dog is that he's not like my big dogs. Oh, there goes the big dog. He doesn't bark like they do. My neighbors must be getting some UPS deliveries, because that is usually what they bark at, is the UPS truck. And during quarantine, since everyone is getting online orders delivered, they've just been having a heyday. Barking and barking and barking. Okay, so now that we're getting to the end, when you end these, depending on where they're at in your pattern, how they meet the stem of whatever it is that they're attached to, you might end them a couple different ways. So you can either just kind of fill in the end, continuing that crisscross pattern. And then as it gets smaller, if it just doesn't end, like let's say the stem was here, I would probably just end it like that. But if the stem is kind of closer to like the bottom point, you don't have to continue to crisscross. You can kind of just fill in the shape. So kind of like switch gears back to like a long short or like satin. That's not really what I mean, but see like how my stitches, I didn't really crisscross those last 2. I'm just kind of like filling in the shape, and your eye just naturally just kind of assumes that they're crossed. And sometimes one side might be a little uneven compared to the other. You notice the way that your leaf falls, which is how leaves are. So I'll just like fill in a little more on one side compared to the other, and kind of just like look at it and then fill as needed. So I feel like my screen keeps getting dark and I can't tell if it's the phone or the actual video. So hopefully you guys can kind of see that. And you can kind of see that crisscross action and how you have like that natural center line of like what a leaf would actually look like, and this nice texture going on either side. So again, that's called the fishbone, and it's just crisscross, crisscross, crisscross all the way down, or nice like crisscrossing V's, I guess is another way to think about it. So looking now, let me put this hoop off to the side. Now looking at our pattern, we are going to, I'll start on this side, do a stem stitch first. So let me grab my needle with my 2 strands here and reknot it. And I'm going to start by bringing my needle up here towards the base of the stem and then stitching up. When I do my twists, I don't think too much of the direction. It's all really preference. Some people are really good at visualizing which way it's going to twist and can make that decision. I think mine's just more of like a gut feeling for when I think about how it's going to twist. I think my preference is usually to hold my loop down, which means, let me grab that other hoop. When I hold it down, it's going to twist. Let me grab my little needle, my pointer. It's going to twist like this one. There you go. It's going to twist like this one instead of this one. So you see those twists are kind of going up. This one's kind of going down. That. So I think that's the way I'm going to do my loop. Again, the most important thing is kind of keep it the same way as you follow your stems. That way it looks like it's all connected and flows the right way. So start my stem stitch. There's my first stitch. I have holding the loop with my thumb. To start it, I'm going to come up through the middle, pull it tight, go back down, doing my best to keep the stitches the same distance apart, come back up through the hole that my last full stitch went down, and then continuing that all the way up. So yes, I guess I've decided. I just naturally grabbed my 2-strand needle. So 2 strands is what I'm going to do for my stem, and 2 strands for my leaf as well. Stitch was a little big. That's all right. We ain't gonna worry about it. Boom. And again, if you have a different stitch in mind, feel free to use it. The whipped back stitch would also be a really similar, I think, like looking stitch, maybe. Oh, I forgot to say what color I'm using for this. One sec, I'll grab it as soon as I finish this stitch here. You can use any green though. I think for like the next stitch along, I'll just kind of give like a family or like of colors or like inspiration colors kind of, and let you guys just go from there and pick whatever colors you want. Because to be honest, this pattern especially, it doesn't really matter. I mean, any green you have is the green that you can use. Any green that you think goes well with your fabric choice, or just any green that you especially like. This green kind of goes along with some of the greens that are in my fabric a little bit, so that's why I chose it. But you could have used any green for these. Or, I mean, if you really are in love with the black, these can also just be black, and that's fine as well. Again, what might also affect how many strands you use is how thick your lines are and if you need to cover them. Right now, 2 strands is kind of doing a good job of covering what I printed on my fabric. My needle's coming a little twisted, so I'm just going to let it dangle to kind of naturally untwist itself, so that way I don't start knotting. because that is frustrating when it does that. And what I like to do is kind of just naturally start to follow the branches off as I come to them. So I'm starting to come to my first branch. So my stitch is just going to follow that branch off to the side here. I just realized I can't really see where it ends. That's interesting. I'll kind of wing it. I think I mentioned last video that my pattern didn't print as dark as I would like it to have printed on here. And that's from me and my messing with it. I messed with like the transparency because I was a little worried about like the lighter bits, like here. I was worried about like those patches and like the ink being too dark and not being able to cover it. So I put down the transparency of the image and then printed it. But as a result, I lost a lot of the pattern in the darker patches. So I think that's just winning and losing, you know? It is what it is, but it's fine. So my pattern might look a little different from yours because I'll have to like go back and redraw a few elements on, kind of guessworking it a little bit, but that's fine. I ain't mad about it. Okay, so that kind of shows you the stem stitch. I'm going to kind of put this down here, maybe come back to that in a second, but I just want to show you. So now let's say I'm finished with that branch. I would just come back, and I'm going to come back as close as I can to like the base of where I think that fork is to continue my stem, keeping my loops the same direction. I'm going to keep pulling them down. Get my fat fingers out of the way. Just like this. Continuing until I get to the next fork. Let's come to the side. There we go. There we go. Try my best to keep the lights. I feel like my stitches are getting a little big. Okay, so now I've kind of reached the next fork of my stem, so to speak. So I'm just going to naturally kind of follow this stem up. Maybe I'll rotate my piece just a smidge, that way it makes sense to my brain. Let me think about this. Yeah, so I'm going to keep my stitch. When I pull my loop, I'm going to pull it down this way, not this way. I'm going to pull it down that way. I'm a little, I won't lie, one of my weak points is like mental visualization, I guess, of when it comes to like shapes. I feel like that's something I've always struggled with, like in school and stuff like that. But so visualizing the twist and like what direction that it's going to go in is a little bit of a guessing game for me. So sometimes I just kind of go with my gut. And I've really been terribly disappointed by the outcome. So we're just going to keep doing that. Here we go. So following the second fork. Okay. I'm going to end my stem stitch there for the moment and kind of demonstrate a little bit of the fishbone with this leaf here, since it's on a nice light bit of fabric. So my leaves are printed on darker. Yours may or may not be. Let me grab my pin again and let's draw some lines. Let's rotate this as well, so that way the leaf is more straight to you guys. Okay, so there we go. So I'm going to draw a center line. I kind of have my needle coming up there. There we go. So that's the center of my leaf. And this leaf, again, is kind of small to have the side stitches, but maybe I'll just like kind of lightly give myself 2 reference points. You don't have to, especially since this leaf is so small. We're going to find out how well it's going to work with a small leaf. I think this might be some of the smaller fishbone leaves I've done. I didn't really think about that until I started stitching it, but I think the effect is still nice and worth it. But again, you can still just do like a satin stitch if you feel like it's not worth your effort to do a fishbone for this. It's totally your call. Okay, so I am going to do my first stitch kind of small. And then I'm going to take 2 stitches to each, one on each side, excuse me, and then go down through the same hole. Like that. One on this side, the same hole, boom. Then I'm going to do my best to follow the shape and keeping the angle. Sorry, I apologize. I'm trying to like see my stitches and at the same time keeping this on camera. Maybe I'll just zoom. Does that work? Oh, that works, I think. There we go. I feel like for this small, you might just end up going all the way across the leaf. So that practice leaf was just for bigger leaves, apparently. Because this small one, might as well just go all the way across, I guess. You're not really wasting that much of your floss. It's a little easier to see your stitch. There we go. We're doing it. There she goes. She is beautiful. Look at that. I just love like that crisscross V fishbone pattern design element, like in anything though, not just embroidery, but like any design element. I just always think it's really pretty. We're kind of doing a van build out, and that's the way like our roof design is going to go on the inside. It's going to be like wood in like a fishbone pattern. My idea. But I think it'll be really pretty. There we go. Almost to the end. And you can kind of see like the fishbone, especially since I'm using like a lighter green. I feel like you can see it. Just like keep in mind if you use a darker green, it just like the black and white blends together. But you can kind of see how my stitches are parallel to each other, just like with satin, keeping the spaces in between them minimal, keeping the angle the same on either side as I put my stitches in, and then just filling in the bottom. I wonder if I can sneak in one more stitch. I'll use the same hole to kind of finish it off because I think that's where it'll naturally go. Beautiful. So yeah, you can kind of see the fishbone shape, even though it is quite tiny. It's a little miniature fishbone shape. And that is a fishbone leaf. So we have the stem, fishbone. There's a couple of leaves to do throughout. And that is week 2. So let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully this helped. Have fun with it. Remember, mix it up. Do whatever you feel is speaking to you. Do a little practice hoop if you want to kind of practice fishbone or stem stitch first before putting on your hoop. That's totally fine. And just have some fun with it. Oh, real fast. Let me grab my floss that fell. I used 3052 for my green. That's the green I used for that.